losses the 49ers had this offseason. So, the 49ers have this great receiving core. Everybody always talks about the weapons they had, but they did lose a key piece of the receiving weapons in this past offseason. That was Kendrick Bourne. What do you think this team can really do to replace the role that Kendrick Bourne was playing on the 49ers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a role that they're definitely going to have to replace. I think one thing to look at is it could come from a multitude of different places. So if George Kittle's healthy, that could help replace it. If they use check more in the pass game, that could help replace it. If Dwelly steps up, that could help replace it. And so it doesn't necessarily have to come from that third receiver spot. What worries me, though, is that Kendrick Bourne was one of those guys that when you needed a big play, he would make it, right? For all the times that he would have the dropsies and whatever else throughout a game, if you needed a big play, he would go out and make that big play for you. He was not afraid of the moment. And so let's say a Debo gets injured, which is not very far-fetched. We've seen it happen multiple times. So when that happens, then what? Right? So you can replace it on the surface, but the moment that you have somebody go down, then what happens? And so that's really more of my concern. It's not necessarily to start the year, but as the year goes on and that war of attrition starts, that's where I'm very interested to see, okay, this is going to be an issue if they don't find somebody or multiple people that could help fill that role.
And I think one of the issues with the 49ers right now is, they have a very top-heavy receiver room, but even then, when you look at it, it's a pretty crowded receiver room. I think if we're talking about wide receivers 3 through 6 through 7 through 8, you could put those guys in almost any order at any point in the offseason, just depending on how you're feeling that day. So I think someone's going to have to separate themselves, or one or two, or even 3 players are going to have to show that they're better than those other wide receivers at the end of the roster. And specifically, I want to go back to something you were saying with Kendrick Bourne, which is that he was the big playmaker for this team. If you look, of his 49 catches that he had last year, he got 35 first downs on that. So that's a high percentage of big plays that we're talking about with Kendrick Bourne. And then even if you look at all of the target share that the 49ers had, he had the second most out of anyone last season with all the injuries they were sustaining. Just like you mentioned earlier, I just don't think we can expect this team to have no injuries to their pass catchers. That would be naive as a 49ers fans, as we know, right? So I think when you take all this into consideration, I even saw how he's, I think, responsible for like 13% of their target share. It's a lot of balls that the 49ers are going to have to find someone else for. So I think Ross Dwelly's name you mentioned, definitely going to take up some of that. But also guys like Brandon Aiyuk, George Kittle, you mentioned them. They're going to be getting more and more catches in this offense. And even then, I don't know if this offense is going to be passing as much as they were last season. They were forced to pass so much. So when Kyle Shanahan gets back to running the ball they eventually move from Jimmy Garoppolo to Trey Lance, hopefully sometime this season, then that will just make that even easier, because that role of Kendrick Bourne, there will be even less targets there available for the players who are on the team.
Yeah, for sure. You're